What up, space weather enthusiasts? Welcome to the Daily Space Weather Show. We'll be showing you some fresh imagery of the closest star. Yeah, thanks for stargazing with us here at the Smash News Network, least busted name in news. That's a 24-hour video, by the way. That's 193 angstroms, 60-minute running difference along with 171 angstroms. There's a big old plasma filament hanging out down there. And so we figured we would begin the festivities by showing some close-ups. Here's the full southern hemisphere view. And we'll also show the equatorial view. Some plasma motions happening there in the northeast. And it looks like certainly some far side events going on as well, including perhaps some large flares. Here's another exciting region here where another sunspot has recently risen over that northeastern limb. You'll see some filamentary activity going on there. That is not half bad. These are 24-hour videos from Solar Dynamics Observatory depicting the extreme ultraviolet emissions of very, very hot iron gas in the solar atmosphere, known as the corona. Anyway, we'll also show the full disk view. Why not? There you go. Those same wavelengths there. And those are great wavelengths for showing both the lower and extended coronas at the same time. And it looks like there is some CME activity happening right around in this area here. We do see some limb darkening there, and we'll get to coronal mass ejections a little bit later in the video. First, let's take a look at sunspots. And we've got, I think, about 160 sunspots at the moment. Looks like at least one group hasn't been named yet that has risen, so maybe two new named sunspot groups between today's video and tomorrow's. Here's colorized magnetogram from SDO also. And flare probability not all that high. These aren't super exciting sunspots. Their magnetic shear is not really large flare producing in nature. And by the way, press the like button if you enjoy the content. And if you're new to the channel, press subscribe. Congratulations on realizing that the channel exists. It's only the world's most comprehensive daily space weather content and detailed solar imagery. If you haven't seen the shorts, perhaps check them out. Massive level of images there for the channel, including the largest solar flare of solar cycle 25, which just went past. So yeah, press the share button, leave us a comment, press all the things, tell your friends and foes about the channel, etc. Let's move on to volcanoes. And I noticed there was some aurora borealis happening here in Iceland, so I figured I'd bring that up first. You might see a little bit of green and purple skies going on there. So some minor auroral activity indeed going on as we create the video. But let's take a look at, of course, everybody wants us to show volcanoes, I guess, so do we have any better webcams than that? You think you'd have a close-up one, right? Check it out, some sweet aurora here, it looks like. There we go, that's nice. Some fantastic aurora there at Iceland. And seriously, though, let's take a look at volcanic activity, if we can find any rifts. And indeed, we did find some. There is some volcanic fissure activity happening near Svartsengi. So minor lava fountaining going on there. It looks like things have calmed down a little bit, actually, at the Reykjanes Peninsula. So let's see what's going on here according to the updates. Here's volcanodiscovery.com's rundown. And there you can see portions of the town being engulfed in flames. Suboptimal. However, some new real estate forming there as well. So you got to give up something to get something else, right? So all kinds of information about it there at volcanodiscovery.com. I'm not going to worry about going over every little bit about it, as this is the daily space weather. Here are the other volcanoes also erupting. So quite a few active volcanoes here, including Nevado de Ruiz, Popocatépetl, and Sabancaya, producing a 25,000 foot plume of volcanic ash. And let's get on to earthquakes. There have been a number of 5 magnitude quakes in the past 24 hours. There are the past 90 days of major quakes. And here are the quakes of a 5 and greater magnitude. There's a 5.0 at Tonga, 50 minutes into today, January 15th. A 5.0 also hit South America at Chile. That was at depth, over 100 kilometers estimated depth. Russia also had a 5.4 right there in Central Asia, quite far inland actually, not a super common place for earthquakes. And we've also got Vanuatu had a 5.1. Bouvet Island had a 5.1, and New Zealand had a 5.1. That's actually well north of the island there, in between New Zealand and Tonga. Continuing right along to get back to some more space weather stuff, and check it out. Here is another composite that we've put together for you here. That's 211 angstroms plus 193 angstroms running difference. And you may see some coronal hole-like features there. Those are coronal holes. So those are coronal hole-like features in that they are coronal holes. So let's get to some stats here. The 10.7 centimeter radial flux is now at 183, I believe, is the F107. 183, I think. There's the 1 year graph. The black line is the F107, the 10.7 centimeter radial flux. Space Weather Enthusiast dashboard there. Not forecasting any geomagnetic storms or geomagnetic unrest. It's a calm forecast there, geomagnetically speaking, from NOAA, and I would tend to agree. Next Earth magnetic moment from space. Let's take a look at that for the past 4 hours. It's our Geospace Magnetosphere movie. So some minor aurora showing up here, and it's geomagnetically calm. We have had some little tiny CME impacts that we'll get to here in a minute, and since that's refreshed, let's let that play through. FYI, we don't edit the videos so that they get onto your screen as promptly as possible. Of course, anything related to nature is very time sensitive, but we do typically show at least 4 hours of the Space Weather Modeling Framework Geospace Magnetosphere movie per day on the channel. And here are ground magnetic perturbations. And you'll probably see some here at Iceland, where we just showed you some aurora. So that's the last 4 hours of Earth's magnetic moment from the ground. I've used those to film the aurora myself. Next, the KP index currently at 2. KP2 is the calm condition we see the Earth currently in. The Discover's not returning any data. Once again, if you click on the ACE, not returning any data. You click ACE only, you say OK. It shows you a blank screen and says Discover. So here's the Discover. And again, a couple of minor little tiny fleeting impacts here. So there's a little CME impact, barely even a blip on the radar. And here's a slightly more substantial one. Here, the solar wind velocity coming up to about 450 kilometers per second, but only a minor spike in the density. You can see a signal here in the plasma temperature. This was the impact point right about here. You see the magnetic field shifts at that moment. Also, the density actually dropped. And then the velocity came up along with the plasma temperature. So that's a coronal mass ejection impact of the very weak variety. Didn't do a lot to the GOES magnetometers. It's just past noon local time for the GOES 18, which at noontime was measuring about 128 nanotesla. Next, our ecliptic plane field plot. From the top view, you got to love the top view. I mean, it really shows you some fantastic predictive value, believe it or not, as we've forecasted all kinds of things based on understanding how this relates to solar activity. Part of our Gong 2 data, that is our magnetic sector, Earth is right in the middle of a North Pole-oriented one. So right there in the middle of the green region there, the North Magnetic Sector. Here's our line of sight field plot, depicting the photosphere fields in gray, polar fields in red and green for south and north respectively, and the solar B field in blue. Next are coronal holes, and there you go. North Pole oriented coronal holes right in the middle of a North Pole oriented sector. And there are some South Pole coronal holes rotating in here. So if you look at the last image, right over there in the northeastern limb, there are some South Pole oriented coronal holes about to make their way across into the Earth-facing zone. So let's take a look at coronal holes here from SDO. There we've dropped the 193 angstroms difference imagery, and there's just 211 by itself. And here's a little closer view, that triangular-shaped coronal hole there rotating toward the west. That might provide a small increase in solar wind in a couple of days, but shouldn't produce any major geomagnetic storms or anything like that. So we got this winky face sun thing going on. What's up with that? It's like we got a winky face sun right here, you know. You got there's the closed eye, here's the open eye. And then, I don't know, something like this. Is that what's going on? The sun, it's got lots of tricks up its sleeve. Have you fallen for tricks that are up the sleeves of charlatans? Hopefully not. Hopefully you're not watching a bunch of nonsense related to space weather on YouTube. And there is certainly plenty of said nonsense. Let's show an amazing close-up here. We're going to show that triangular-shaped sunspot. There you go. We've added the 171 angstroms difference imagery there. So it does show you some potential field surface source lines effectively, as that 171 angstroms iron does orient to magnetic field lines, especially in the lower corona. So there you go, great close-up of a coronal hole there. And let's move on to before sunspots, there's the full disk view with those same wavelengths. It's 171 angstroms, 60-minute running difference, along with 211 angstroms raw UV image. Not half bad. And sunspots are next. So there's the sunspot number. It's at about, it's actually below 150 here, down to 142, something like that. 142 is the sunspot number. And there is the flare probability monitor and scoreboard. Not really that likely to see any large flares here at the moment. I'm not putting out a solar flare watch. However, I would say the most likely place to see one would be in the southwest. So these multiple setting groups down here are the most likely place, in my opinion, for a large flare. So we'll see what happens on tomorrow's video. And before we get to other things, let's take a look at sunspots here in close-up detail from SDO's HMI instrument. There are the magnetic fields. No major changes happening here since yesterday. No major degradation. No major growth. It's been pretty stable. And the sun's been pretty quiet in terms of flaring also. So no major flares. Maybe a little bit of degradation in that far north sunspot group up here. Yeah, those have definitely degraded. Almost completely gone now, actually. Yeah, some degradation in the northern hemisphere period. So multiple sunspot groups evaporating there. And yeah, so that's looking like a downtick. There was another sunspot group that rose right here. That's looking like it's beta class. And then there's another one that rose up here. So that'll make up for some of the sunspot degradation. And let's get back to more stats. So there's the proton flux. Just a little tiny spike in the proton flux recently there. Nothing to write home about. And the X-ray flux is kind of weak as well here. So a little bit of a dip in the X-ray flux. Background flux level is around a C1.1. Before we get to a star chart, here's 131 angstroms, 24-hour video, SDO. and next a star chart. So this is what's going on overhead where we're located. We're in Lehigh Valley, PA. If you want to make your own, head to skyandtelescope.org, put in your city or zip code. We've got the crescent moon there in between the two largest planets in the solar system. So that's a thing to see in the early night sky, perhaps. Here's a solar system forecast. Here are things today, courtesy of theplanetstoday.com. Here's the 1 week forecast. That's where things will be in a week. And no, the planets are still not going to kill you. If you're wondering what the purple color is, that is that planet in retrograde, moving backward in relation to the rest of the stars with respect to Earth. Anyway, here's our astronomy photo of the day, and we've got a bunch of rowdy, hot, active blue giant stars illuminating a reflection nebula, along with a bunch of hydrogen gas, and also nestled in there are some much darker light sources known as brown dwarfs. Somewhere in between the size of the Sun and the size of Jupiter, you have a thing called a brown dwarf, which is kind of a not a very well understood star, kind of like all the rest of stars. Anyway, that's what's going on there. It's multiple different gases happening, and it's the object is star cluster IC348. If you want to read up on that yourself, head to apod.nasa.gov and go have yourself a read about the chemically complex soup being illuminated by those bright blue stars, and all the much smaller, less massive, and less bright brown dwarfs that occupy some of the lumps in that dust. Great crisscross-like pattern there of filaments as well showing up in that reflection nebula. Next, time to move on to CMEs, but first, don't forget to support the channel. Hey, would you like to see some do you have questions for a particle physicist that you would like answered? Well, if so, head to smashomash.com/forum. It's an entirely free forum that we created quite a while ago, back in 2019, actually. So if you want to ask a particle physicist a question, submit the question at smashomash.com/forum. It's in the general science section. And that section of the video is hosted by Eugene the Philosopher. So make sure you subscribe to his channel as well if you haven't. Eugene the Philosopher, the largest contributor to our channel, as he gets closer and closer to 1,000 subscribers. So he needs your assistance. Please help out Eugene as we try harder and harder to import Mr. Bagashov to the United States. Next, moving on to CMEs. Yeah, coronal mass ejections. They're a thing. So let's see what's going on with them. Here are today's CMEs from the George Mason University. And there are some events there that may have earthly directed components. Let's see what we can figure out. So that is 80 frames from today, January 15th. Now we're going to add the LASCO C3, which is the blue coronagraph over on the left. It's basically just a zoomed out version of the C2 on the left. And what do we have? What do we have? There's a CME coming out of the western limb, it looks like. It's pretty diffuse. Might be far side. Somewhat out of the south and out of the west. Okay, that's what I was seeing before. And do we have anything that coincides with that? Well, let's take a look at filaments. I think it was on the far side, folks, so I don't think that those CMEs have earthly directed components. So anyway, there are filaments from Cerro Tololo. Here's the colored version. And one of these got named. I think this one got named after somebody's wife, Maria, or something. And if you want to name filaments, join us over on Twitter, x.com/Smashomash, all over the internet at Smashomash. And before we get to bonus features, the latest couple of hours here from the GOES 16 SUVi. And there's a crown prominence just forming here at the southern hemisphere, at the southern polar region, rather. So they're right in there. You can see a large coronal loop there forming, otherwise known as a plasma prominence. Not likely to turn into an earthly directed coronal mass ejection, but pretty sweet. And let's move on to our bonus features. Yes, bonus features are next, starting with satellite charging hazards, and we have some minor ones there over the northern Indian Ocean, India, and moving into the Middle East. So there you go. Satellite charging hazards, minor surface charging, when low-energy electrons build up on the exterior of spacecraft. GOES electron flux here, coming up just like NOAA forecasted, it looks like. That's the last 3 days. That's the past 365 days. And that is the forecast. So NOAA actually did underestimate or overestimate a little bit. It looks like the next one will be also... the next forecast is going to be an underestimation. So that'll update here shortly. I'm not sure exactly what time. And frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. Anyway, here are the data from the ionosphere, and we're showing the F layer at about 300 kilometers of altitude. There it is, courtesy of Australian Government Bureau of Meteorology, who may or may not do a better job than the Australian Bureau of Virology. Let us know what you think in the comments. Chances are there is no such bureau, which makes it even more hilarious. Or maybe you're mad about it. Let us know in the comments. Here's the anomalygram, since we showed you the raw megahertz, the raw frequency. Here's the anomaly in megahertz from a 30-day median. We are seeing quite a few actually low-frequency anomalies happening there. Likely the result of those little tiny CME impacts we showed you. After all, there was some magnetic field shifting and some variations in the solar wind temperature and velocity and density. So not super surprising based on the solar wind data we just showed you. Makes sense that the previous day would have some low frequency anomaly. We'll also show the WHAM, the whole atmosphere model. Because we gotta have faith. We gotta have faith. We gotta have faith, the faith that you're gonna press the like button. Or else we're going to track you down, and don't be such a clown, 'cause we'll make you frown. Noobs, we hope you're not falling for crap, and it's time to forget all about that and show the latest images. So there you go. There are some new sunspots that just rose. One pretty up high in the northeast, one closer to the equator. They're both fairly magnetically complex, but again, my favorite place to see a large flare is down there in the southwest. So there's the full disk. And let's move on to meteorology. So we're starting out meteorology with pressure, because there's a bunch of high pressure and low pressure going on, and that's a major aspect of the North American environment. Right now, this low is certainly affecting things as it's pulling a bunch of air up to the north. And then you've got this high pressure, which is all massive air. The jet stream is unleashing from Canada all the way to Texas and beyond. So there's a little tidbit of what's going on. And here come the wind patterns of planet Earth. Shout out to our viewers from planet Earth, and make sure you leave us a comment if you're viewing the video from another timeline, plane of existence, planet, starship, multiverse, etc. Anyway, these are the surface winds of the east, and these are the jet streams. Jet streams of Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Surface winds. Surface winds of the west, and the jet streams. massive upper level low right here. And you can see it in the jet stream. It's a perfect example of a massive upper level polar low. Huge counterclockwise rotation there in central Canada. Anyway, moving along to clouds and fog. As Brazil clouds up again like it does every day after sunset. And we're going to show that polar low. This is our 3.9 micrometer infrared radiation map. And here is a great close-up of that properly massive low. That is an inhospitable place right there, folks. I don't know what the temperatures are, but I suspect it's not going to be surfing weather. Dag! That is bonkers. So here's our precipitation type map, and we've got a bunch of ice forming here. Large areas. Check it out, folks. That is dangerous indeed. It's like rush hour in these areas. So, dude, if you don't have to drive, on your way home, if you're driving, don't drink. And if you drink, don't drive. In fact, don't drive, period. Because look at that. That's a disaster. That is a disaster. Warm air bringing rain onto cold ground. That is not what you want. You want to see the worst driving ever? There'll be news stories tomorrow. And also pretty weird, there's ice falling way up in these northern areas. There must be some warm air blowing up there or something. That's berserk. Anyway, moving along to our weather.gov map. Weather.gov is where to get your weather warnings from, because we're not going to cover all those counties. That's hundreds and hundreds of counties. That's too many counties. Look at the weather warnings. Dag. Mostly cold weather type alerts. Wind chill advisories and... Anyway, I'm not going to try to call them out. That's what's going on across the U.S. That is a lot of weather. So let's take a look at some forecasts here. Here's a GFS 72-hour. There you go. GFS 72-hour pressure and precipitation forecast. As more snow comes in the northern Rockies. And, well, anyway, there's the map. 72-hour accumulated positive snow depth change in inches. Oh, it looks like we got upgraded in Pennsylvania. They've added another inch or two to our total. Nice. Always excited about snow. 72-hour accumulated positive snow depth change forecast. And the heaviest snow, some areas featuring 3 feet are coming to Washington. Yeah, Washington. Next, the jet stream forecast. We're going to have the deep freeze replaced with some anomalously warm temperatures coming up in a couple of days. Here's your temperature anomaly forecast in degrees Celsius. I stand corrected. We'll have average temperatures in a few days. So yeah, the deep freeze there, it's going to sort of hover around Kentucky, Tennessee. Anyway, there's the map. There's the map. A picture says 1,000 words. I'll say less. Here comes lightning. That's the past maybe 10 hours. Here's a real-time lightning map. We saw some pretty fierce storms over southern Florida. And indeed, there are still some active cells at both Fort Myers and Fort Pierce. Looks like it's moving north. That is where your active cells are at the moment. Lightningmaps.org. Next time you hear thunder, highly recommended. We'll close out the video with U.S. Doppler. So likely some water spouts and some pretty severe weather there, possibly damaging winds and hail on both of those cells. And it looks like St. Petersburg, Tampa is also in the crosshairs. So some more strong weather there making its way through the Gulf. We'll briefly zoom out to show the full 50-state view. And then we'll focus on the lower 48 view. So there you go. Snow all the way from Colorado to Boston. Here is our clouds and fog imagery. have the shortwave radiation map on the NASA GOES Interactive Weather Satellite Suite. And there is the water vapor map. Here's your recap. U.S. Doppler radar. A little lull in the snow there for St. Louis before it resumes. There is clouds and fog. And there is the water vapor map. A little cell of dry air here making its way across the Gulf states toward the Carolinas. And here's me closing this thing out. Thanks for tuning into the Smash News Network, least busted name in news. I've been your host, Dan, a.k.a. Smash-O-Mash, signing off. And may that solar wind be at your back. While I go back to the bunker again, I'm always climbing down the ladder and then back up again.